Welcome everybody to this Digital Value Institute event. We're joined by some fantastic people here, a lot of knowledge in this room. Just some housekeeping before we get started. There's some handouts, some of the Digital Value Institute roadmaps that you can download. They're also available from the website. There's also a question tab. You can submit questions along the way and we'll do our best to address those. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Thornton.
All right, thank you, Atli. And you can pull up my slides. And well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience. Thank you so much for attending. Our topic today is basically transformation, transforming the business. And we'll go to the next slide. As a futurist, one of the things I have to do is I actually have to take the bigger picture. So if you actually do step back from and look at it, you know, transformation has definitely become a thing. All right, and one of the things we've noticed is that there is a robust transformation industrial complex. What that means is there is an ecosystem that actually, you know, like a very deep and large ecosystem, the places where money is being made. And so you have academics creating a body of knowledge. You have analysts writing, it seems like a white paper a day, you know, white papers and research. You have consultants with an abundance of methodologies in the transformation space. And so you come to the conclusion that there is a lot of signal out there. But one of the things we also have to be cautious about is not all of that signal is efficacious, i.e. it does not necessarily create a positive desired outcome. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things is so there is truth out there. There's some of the brightest people in the world are working this transformation issue. And so there's a lot of good things that you need to know, things that it's almost malfeasant for you not to know. But there's also some stuff that is noise, if you will. So there's noise, and we're gonna have to try and focus on the truth. And let's go to the next slide. So one of the truisms about transformation is not a new thing. So I organized my first transformation conference in 1988 when I was working at Nolan Norton and Company. Basically, I think I was the ripe old age of 28 years old. So actually, I was a little younger than 28 in these pictures, but transformation's been around for a while. All right, let's go to the next slide. Thanks, Atli, you're doing a great job. All right, but I just want transformation is not an unnatural act. In fact, transformation is a natural part of modern existence. And I, as a futurist, nay historian, basically, I would say that you know, our modern world started after the Middle Ages, which is 1,000 years, you know, like which was a period of 1,000 years long, from the fall of Rome in 476 AD. But it really is a natural part of the modern world. And let's go to the next slide. So when I think about the Middle Ages, I ask people, you know, as executive audience and my students at the Ohio State University, I ask, did the people living in the Middle Ages know they were living in the Middle Ages? Now, if you approach this empirically, right, you say, okay, well, Middle Ages, about 86% of the people living in the Middle Ages were peasants. So if you're a peasant, and you wake up one morning and you say, so how's your day go? Or how's your life? What's going on? They say, and the peasant will respond to you, today sucks. All right, you know. So now, and if you're historically oriented, you know, ask them like, well, how was yesterday? He said, well, yeah, yesterday sucked too. And if you actually get the peasant to think about the future, they're going to say, well, come to think, I'm going out on a limb. I bet tomorrow's going to suck as well. All right, so that's kind of medieval thinking. Let's go to the next slide. And because the problem was, in the Middle Ages, there was not this concept of progress. You know, they basically everything was sort of the same. If you were born a peasant, you were going to stay a peasant. You're born a king, you're going to stay a king. There really wasn't this evolution. There wasn't a transformation. You were sort of set in place. So let's go to the next slide. Because in the Middle Ages, basically life sucks and then you die. Next slide. All right, but we're no longer living in the Middle Ages. So next slide. All right, so we're actually living in a transformative time. And we'll go to the next slide. And if you come to think of it, we've been living in a transformative time for the past 600 years. So there's a huge body of knowledge about transformation. And so, so it behooves us to say, like, what did we learn during these 600 years? And so, like, and one of the things at the essence, a foundational element of transformation, and it's multidimensional, but a foundational element of transformation is expanding knowledge and skill sets. And so that means that transformation leaders sort of have to be teachers. And that's why our two speakers today are some of not only the exceptional executives, but they're wonderful teachers as well. But we're transforming from a state of ignorance to a state of wisdom. We're migrating from a state basically of non-mastery to mastery. And this is on multiple dimensions. All right, let's go to the next slide. We're also migrating, if you will, like our status and role is transforming from student to teacher, from worker to leader, from victim to hero. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And also performance. We're as leaders, we're trying to take our organizations, whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit, basically from average to exceptional, and from at expectations to beyond expectations. Let's go to that next slide. And so digital transformation moves organizations away from the twos, too slow, too siloed, too complex, too bureaucratic, and too rigid. So you're trying to transform from those less than good spots. And one of the truths is transformation takes time. It's not instantaneous. It's not, you can't do it just by purchasing technology. Now, hopefully, and as a transformation leader, you sort of get to choose how long it takes. You have to work within the metabolic rate of true and large systemic change, but it's probably going to be quicker than 140 years that are going on here in Barcelona. So let's go to the next slide. And we know that external events and technology can accelerate the transformation cycle. Definitely, definitely what has happened here. Now, as we look at transformation, all parties in the enterprise need to play nice. You've got to basically get everybody to collaborate, and which is in a polarized world, very, very complex. One of the great leadership challenges. Let's go to the next slide. And all C's, all your C-level executives, your CXOs have a role to play. Now, this picture is a picture of the Titanic. And so, like, you can imagine that the folks on the starboard watch, basically, or the port watch, basically said, well, there are no holes on my side of the boat, so you don't have to worry about it. No, everybody has a role to play in this, all right? And we have to specify what those roles are. Let's go to the next slide. And transformation requires energy. One of the defining realities of the world we live in is people are tired. They're exhausted. And this is Kazuo Ishiguro. It was a 2017 Nobel Prize winner, and I think he mistakenly, very in a self-deprecating way, he describes himself as an exhausted writer from an intellectually exhausted generation. Well, as a leader, as a transformational leader, you can't be exhausted. You have to put energy into it, and you have to have ideas. You have to have ideas. All right, let's go to the next slide. And so transformation requires leadership. And that's really why we're here today. And this is why I had a very brief opening, is that I'm very pleased. We'll go to the next slide, Atlee. Is that we have two exceptional leaders here to share their insight, their experiences, and some of their thoughts about transformation. Now, Barbara Cooper, basically, who was a CIO at Toyota Motor USA, basically, I've known Barbara for 30 years, but before I met Barbara, I met Barbara's people. I was teaching at UCLA. We were doing an executive program. We did it 4 times a year. It was called the Managing the Information Resource. And every class, we would have 3 or 4 Toyota people in the room, and they were brilliant. They were geniuses, And I said, what is going on? I said, we have a good Uber leader, and that was Barbara. So I finally got to meet Barbara, and it changed my life. All right. So now I'm going to introduce you to Barbara, basically, who also is going to change your life. Here you go. Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Thornton. That's quite generous of you. Yeah, we do go back a long way. Well, I think the word transformation or digital transformation change is used so frequently these days, it's often taken for granted. And just about any first line of a CIO's resume has the word transformation. So I thought it might be helpful to focus on a few of the more nuanced aspects of successful transformation leadership. I find it can be as relevant today as it was at various stages of my career as I faced the challenges of leading large companies through the adoption of generational technology change. I held senior leadership positions in IT in 5 different industries, 3 of them as a CIO, and from the very beginning of my career, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to take risks and build a reputation for transformation and turnaround skills. My primary focus today will be highlighting the key leadership themes during my tenure as the CIO for Toyota, where I spent the last 17 years of my career. When I arrived at Toyota, though it was a Fortune 25 company at the time, the IT operation wouldn't have made it into the Fortune 1000. The technology and the staff skills were at least 10 years behind. So my approach was to start with a listening tour with the business executives and the dealers, and then the IT staff, and next conduct a systems audit. As I came through that analysis, it was evident that Toyota's strength was in manufacturing and its reputation for quality products. It was not, however, very mature from a business perspective in either the sales or financing arms of the business, and this is where I am focusing today. This was the late 90s, and they had still not deployed PCs throughout the business. For perspective, I had introduced network PCs globally at American Express 10 years earlier. The advantage I had at Toyota, however, was that they had the willingness and the capital to invest in an aggressive campaign to catch up in the technology space. But you know, there's a physics principle that was true back then as it is today. The farther behind you are, the less likely you are to catch up, regardless of how much money and resources you can throw at it. In other words, it's the drag effect of legacy technology, complexity, and skills that can make driving comprehensive change very difficult. So this brings me to my first leadership theme, the strategy, but not just any strategy. It needed to be a disruptive strategy. The need for aggressive innovation and synchronizing of efforts was not only key, but had to result in an outcome that was not based in how to catch up, but how do you go from being far behind to literally jumping ahead of the best of your competition? You know, this required rethinking organizational alignment with the business and taking some extraordinary technology risks. For example, client server was the mainstream architecture in the late 90s, but we didn't have any PCs at that time. So I made a decision to jump over client server and go directly to an internet-based solution to build the next generation of dealer systems. But using the internet back then was kind of really new. And so this resulted in deploying the first commercial VPN and the first transactional PC-based platform that supported multiple back-end applications. By developing partnerships with Microsoft, Dell, and at that time, MCI Communications, they formed a team that collaborated on the first of its kind architecture and put us at least 5 years ahead of the big 3 automakers in North America. So disruptive strategy has a lot to do with advanced technology solutions and aggressive innovation, but more importantly, it doesn't matter how technically brilliant you are if you spend the next several years of energy just to get the IT function to a current standard. It was important for me to begin the process of integrating not just the technology, but the organization into the business, not just aligning IT with the business. As I highlight the next key themes, watch for a common thread of driving structural and cultural change between both IT and the business. Yes, you could say I was stepping out of my lane when I emphasized business change, but helping the business to consume an aggressive new operating model for IT required redefining the roles for both IT and the business. It would innovate and deploy a new generation of technology. So my second theme, the people. My motto, you get the people right, you get the technology right. To get the people right, you have to be able to out-HR HR. You need to know enough about their rules, regulations, and inherent biases like back in the day. Why a highly qualified data architect couldn't make more money than a manager, Why is it so hard to get headcount when you can easily hire 100 contractors? Ostensibly, I needed to build a model that was fit for purpose, clearly justified conditions that distinguished between hiring an employee versus a contractor or utilizing a service contract for an entire function. I went on to design an operating model for talent that treats the entire life cycle of a technical employee, with development plans custom built to keep them not just current, but to stay ahead of the tech cycle. You can't do that if you don't know what the future technical skill readiness means and how to judge if an individual has reached it or not. I began staff swapping early on in an effort to expose IT staff to the business and bring business staff into IT. We established a career ladder and developmental framework that offers transparency into how they can navigate each step of advancement in their career instead of just standing back and muttering, I don't know why that jerk got promoted. So this helped build an individual accountability around career management. I hired my own technical recruiter as an employee and added several HR staff skilled in organization and professional development of technical personnel. In order to get the right people, it's necessary for recruiters and HR to understand the culture, and especially the underlying strategy for the organization that was going to be radically different from other parts of the IT, different parts of Toyota and the IT industry itself. As an example, keeping in mind, this was 25 years ago, I established one of the first offices of the CIO to help me drive significant change. And I didn't want just a glorified PMO. So therefore, I included a chief of staff, finance and shared services, HR and organizational development, PMO, procurement and contracts, communications and marketing, governance and demand management. Also, I added one of the first enterprise architecture functions back then, inclusive of data architecture. It had the teeth to not only direct the attrition strategy of the legacy portfolio, but a design and hold accountable strategy for how applications would be built or bought, and the rules for what business users could do on their own versus what IT could do. These two functions were probably the most important tools in my efforts to educate, motivate, and ready the business to adapt to the new IT operating model. So the third theme was the customer. I learned that in taking on large, complex turnaround strategies as a CIO, I needed to build a model that addressed several customer constituencies. First, of course, the inside customer. Every employee from an entry-level clerk to the CEO, including contractors, anyone who relied on our technology to communicate, make an informed decision, and transact their business safely every day. Secondly, were our dealers, small mom and pop outfits in rural towns to mega dealers in big cities. Third were the people purchasing our vehicles and then becoming tenured owners. The currency for success in delivering that moment of value for the customer that can differentiate your services and digital experience from competitors requires vision and extraordinary communication skill. As a CIO, taking the time to embed myself in the daily life of my customers, whether it was shadowing a Toyota financial call center agent for a day, a service writer or technician working on a 4Runner in a dealership, it was important to see and understand for myself what the experience was really like. I began integrating IT into the business at the beginning of the .com boom. I convinced the head of marketing to allow me to move 12 of my staff into their division. So from the very early days, I could help guide the evolution from the content-only phase to the transaction with a customer phase of e-commerce. So regardless of this being the digital era or the last era, you have to be able to have the communication skill to educate, influence, and inspire your customer constituencies. Seeing the business from the outside in, truly the customer's perspective can make a huge difference. So my fourth theme was show me the money. One of the most common problems I deal with in coaching CIOs in my executive coaching practice is that they're often still stuck in a financial model that hasn't changed in 30 years. Some of the lingering problems of the IT budgets are things like carrying the depreciation costs from capital projects built and deployed on behalf of the business units, poorly designed outsourcing contracts, and asked to take the same percentage of across-the-board cuts as the rest of the business, just to name a few. A few of the ideas that worked for me were instituting a zero-based budget model and teaching your team how to sustain it. Hire your own procurement and contracting staff that are experienced in the tech industry. Move from a fiscal year budget mindset to an internal economy based on a supply and demand construct with the business as an equal partner. Overlay a 3-year rolling budget for project CapEx to tie back to your fiscal year budget for reconciliation, but allows for practical forecasting and planning. Move from a milestone-only metric for large projects to include baseline tiebacks. Literally stop any project not meeting calibrated goals and take the money allocated for their next phase and give it to another project approved and waiting for funds. That gets the business owner's attention real quick. Build a demand management governance model that is owned equally by the business and IT. In my view, investments in technology didn't have a line where traditional IT stopped and marketing and e-commerce and vehicle-based telematics started. The same principles of ROI, product and project management, quality control, and ultimately a more profitable and positive customer experience is the goal. The last theme is succession planning and the concept of future ready. Succession planning isn't about finding the right person to target and groom as your replacement when you retire, but a fundamental strategy to build the capabilities, not just within IT, but in my point of view, the business, to be highly adaptive, comfortable with change, innovation, and risk. In other words, to be future ready. I identified my successor 5 years before I retired, and interestingly, his experience was primarily from the business side, not IT. I had him assume several roles within IT to gain exposure, but to me, the future required someone comfortable and confident with the technology, but more importantly, would be the one to lead the business into the full-on digital age. He demonstrated the superior communication skills, being as comfortable with the hardcore technical staff as he was with a plant manager or a dealer. As we were beginning to build out the competitive landscape of the digital interface between the customer and the vehicle, the major players like Salesforce, Oracle, Apple, Amazon were all vying to carve out real estate and capture data on this new generation of vehicles come appliances, rich with customer data. I gave him one last instruction as I exited. Whatever you do, do not give our data away. It will be the lingua franca of our business and our competitive advantage. So he not only took over as CIO, but quickly established a startup company, Toyota Connected, that focused on data, not just the infotainment telematics data, but all the vehicle data being generated real time from millions of these appliances and customers on our network, and beginning to build the next dimension of the business. He is not only the CEO of Toyota Connected, but Chief Digital Officer of Toyota, and is still has IT reporting to him. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Barbara. Just a recap. All right, those were 5 themes, each of which deserves its own book. So that let me make sure I got it. Theme 1 was the strategy, right? You know, theme 2 was employees. Was that right? Is that, and like theme 3 was the customer. Theme 4 was show me the money. And theme 5 was succession planning, right? Was it a terrible paraphrase, that type of thing? All right, thank you very much. Exceptional. All right, now we're gonna migrate to Cheryl. All right, now Cheryl, basically, I keep trying to get Barbara to write a book, but she hasn't done it yet. But Cheryl has written a book, you know, bless her heart, you know, basically, and she is now sharing some of her insights with the very fortunate students at George Mason University. Is that right? All right, you know, it's a wonderful book, and Cheryl has some of the best stories, I think, in the business. But now we're going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you. Thanks, Thornton and Adel, for inviting me, and thanks for sharing your 5 strategies, Barbara. That was really interesting. A quick introduction. I have spent my entire career in IT since I fell in love with computers in grad school. I went to Penn State, and I decided as soon as I heard the term CIO that I wanted to be the CIO, and I wanted to be a CIO of a Fortune 50 company. Now, I knew that was impossible because A, I'm female, and B, There's only 50 of them. But I decided to use that as kind of my guiding light. I knew I needed to have a plan. So I thought about this and I decided that I had to have experience in applications development, that I needed to have data center operations, that I needed to have telecommunications, and I needed to have security. I needed to know something about each one of those areas in order to run an organization that was responsible for all those areas. So I worked as an application programmer up on Capitol Hill and at Arthur Young, and I was there when we became Ernst & Young. And I moved from EY to running the IT operations at Honeywell Federal. Honeywell Federal was a division of Honeywell that did all mainframe outsourcing, not all, but Honeywell mainframe outsourcing to the federal government. And while I was there running those operations, I moved us into distributed systems and into server farms. I was thinking about my need for telecommunications and security, and I was reading the Washington Post one day, and I saw an ad for Verizon. They wanted some senior leaders, so I applied to a blind ad from the newspaper, and I became a VP for strategic systems at Verizon. So I brought my skills, but on the side, I learned an awful lot about telecommunications and about security. So now I was ready to be a CIO to address all those issues. And I became the CIO at the largest gas and electric distribution company in New York. And while I was there, we actually bought 5 or 6 other companies, and I pulled all of the IT organizations together and took all the synergies for the first 2 years for it. Interestingly, when I was at Verizon, I managed about 1,500 people. And when I got my first CIO job, there were about 250 people in my organization. But I had a seat at the table. And I think that that was important, at least important to me at the time. So a few years later, I got a phone call. You know, you're one of 2 candidates being considered for McKesson. McKesson at the time was Fortune 31, their global CIO position, and I became McKesson CIO. And when I left, we were Fortune 14. So the question is once you achieve your dream, what do you do? What do you do next? So next, I decided to, I did consulting and I became interim CIO at a number of places. Of course, my last interim CIO I was 4 years at the 2nd largest airline in Canada. So it wasn't super interim. For the last couple years, I've been working with large corporations and technology vendors on IT and digital transformation. And as Thornton mentioned, my pandemic project for a year was to write a book, The Day Before Digital Transformation. So let's talk about IT's technology, and I will bring some of those concepts back at the end. But let's talk about IT's technical and technology-related roles and responsibilities. What are they? And how do they contribute to the success in digitally transforming a business? Let's start with what IT's role is not. And can we go to the next chart? So let's start with history. We're in the 4th Industrial Revolution. What did the successful companies in the other organizations in the first 3 do? What made them successful in the first 3 revolutions? So the first one was the invention of the steam engine. That was the emerging technology. The second one was electricity, the discovery of electricity, the discovery how to control it, and then mass production. The third age is the electronic age, figuring out how to build analog computers. And we are now in the digital age, which started in 1980. It's projected to go until about 2040. So we have 20 years left in this age. How do we be successful in this age? Well, if you look at the first 3 industrial revolutions, business leaders have always been responsible for ensuring that the new technologies were incorporated into either their existing products and services or creating new products and services and ways of doing business. There were no IT groups to assign those responsibilities to, okay? For all of history, since technology has been around, the business has been responsible for incorporating those technologies into customer-facing products and services. So the successful the successful companies in the past have always had business leaders who have gotten these expert technology people in the room with them on a day-to-day basis, and together they would create new products and services. Even look at some of the companies from initially in the 1980s and 90s. They had both. Steve Jobs had Steve Wozniak at Apple. Larry Page and Sergey Brin had Eric Schmidt at Google. Larry Ellison and Ray Lane together built Oracle. Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos have had all sorts of senior technology people dedicated in the room with them as they were building those businesses. So successfully offering new products and services by incorporating new technologies into the business has, throughout history, been the job of business leaders. That's a really important concept when we stop to think about it. But now let's talk about what we found when we researched about 100 companies, those that have successfully digitally transformed and those that have not. Spoiler alert, successful digital transformation is not a part-time IT job. Can you change the next slide? So first, based on what we learned from history, think about it. How many CIOs are qualified experts in one or more of these emerging digital technologies, which when built into products and services or tightly coupled with products and services actually help an organization digitally transform? How many business leaders? I mean, in the past, the business leaders had steam engine experts, they had electricity experts, they had hardware engineering experts. Today, the business would need specific 3D printing experts or AI or machine learning or robotics or embedded sensors or RFID or wearable devices. How many CIOs have detailed training and experience in any one of those technologies to truly help the business transform its products and services? Second, how many CIOs have detailed training and experience in manufacturing or maintaining customer products and services or marketing or sales or pricing or consumer experience management or channel management or product and service customization, competitor intelligence? How many have experience in managing very major product and service P&Ls? How many even have the interest in doing any of that? Wasn't hot on my list. Third, if the CIOs are the organization's core products and services, if they're digitizing the core products and services, who's responsible for the critical infrastructure to deliver those new digitized products and services? We'll talk about that more in a minute. But let's talk about hiring a chief digital officer, a chief innovation officer, a chief transformation officer, chief disruption officer, or maybe the CIO maintaining both of those titles. Those are really sexy titles, but the research shows that they don't work. 2 years into the role, not much valuable industry disruption or new revenue generation is going on. So why? The next slide. There's lots of reasons why these new sexy titles don't work. Barbara mentioned chief data officer. You notice that that title is not here because chief data officer is critical. It's absolutely critical to be somewhere in your organization. Having someone focusing on data is absolutely critical. These are more the sexy titles that have come up recently. Why aren't they successful? There's no clear organization-wide digital vision, not typically established, or no defined digital portfolios with an eye toward a P&L. Often there's no defined business sponsor. Often these positions report to the CFO, which removes them even one more level from being at the executive table. Too often the budgets for these organizations aren't competitive. They haven't competed against all the other product and service budgets for the year. So if you have a budget that's just been kind of handed to somebody and say, okay, you go do something special with this, as opposed to compete for particular products, particular services, particular efforts, digitized efforts against the established traditional efforts, you're not ever going to determine priorities. You're not going to determine who should, which efforts you're going to stop and which efforts are going to continue unless you're in direct competition for dollars. So sexy titles aren't working. But what does work? So both our experience and our research show that successful digital transformation happens when specific technology experts are embedded directly in the business, not outsourced to a separate team, not loaned out from IT, not made the responsibility of IT or hired to operate separately from day to day. When I was at the airline, we wanted to put Wi-Fi on airplanes. Of course, that was the big thing to do. And they would borrow my telecommunication guys. But if my telecommunication guys are helping airplanes figure out how to get Wi-Fi on airplanes, they're not helping me with the telecommunications massive challenges that we had managing 89 bases around the world and having bases increase continually. So business leaders inside business units are responsible for digital transformation, and that's when it's successful. So if business is responsible for digital transformation, what's IT's role? So the next slide. Most IT groups have done a great job with the early digital technologies. These are the ones from the 1980s and 1990s. They've implemented these because these technologies go across the entire organization, across all the business units. They're kind of basic technologies that we started to use. They came up early in the digital age. They offered incredible efficiencies, the ERP systems. They lowered costs by implementing database and collaboration and sales and marketing tracking and online systems. They provided new ways for customers to get access to the company's products and services through like the PC and mobile computing. But go to the next slide. But these early technologies are now mature, and having them implemented is simply table stakes for organizations in the current stage, in the current age, this disruptive age portion of the digital age. You have to incorporate these emerging technologies into your products and services, or tightly couple them with your products and services in order to truly disrupt industries, in order to truly move forward and be successful in the digital age. So what's IT role now? Next slide. Someone in the organization has to make sure that there's a highly available, reliable, scalable, secure, cost-effective infrastructure that's built and maintained to deliver these new digitized products and services and ways of doing business to customers or users or clients or guests or patients or citizens or whatever you want to call your end user of your business products and services. And the IT group has to support all of the internal applications that cross all the business units. So they have to provide something that makes the customer look to the organization as one organization, and this is you're interfacing with one organization. They have to provide the delivery structure for that, and they have to do it in a really, really good digital ready way. That's a big critical job on its own. That's what CIOs are trained to do. That's what we do better than anybody else in the organization. And if we don't do it, who is going to do it? CIOs can also help the business hire and retain qualified technologists. They can help coordinate those skills across all the different business units. They can act as a critical member of the executive team to assess the status of the business digitization efforts and the investments that the company's making or the organization's making. IT can and should be a very important team member in digitization efforts, but its primary responsibility, and we found this over and over when we found companies that were doing digital transformation successfully, IT was responsible for the delivery of the infrastructure that actually delivered the new digital products and services, and for all of the internal applications and operations. You know, some consulting companies today are selling the concept of two-speed IT, developing customer-facing capabilities at high risk, high speed, while at the same time building and supporting internal application and infrastructure systems at speeds that attempt to remove all risk. That doesn't make any sense. And importantly, it really doesn't work. So we found that those organizations that view digital transformation is just another IT project, it's a path to failure. Having business leaders, two big significant drivers of success. Having business leaders accept responsibility for embedding these digital technologies into their products and services, or creating new products and services and ways of doing business using them, is critical, number one. Number two is holding IT accountable for building and maintaining digital-ready infrastructures that enable the successful delivery of the new digital products and services. No one can do it better than us. No one can do it better than IT. We can't do what the business does, and the business can't do what we do. So separating the responsibilities and making sure that we both, hold our own is what's going to make it successful. So if you go back to my plan to become a CIO and think about it, I said that I needed four areas of experience in order to truly be a CIO. I needed to understand application development. I needed to understand data center operations. I needed to understand telecommunications, and I needed to understand security. And those are still so key to making an organization successful in the digital age.
All right. Nicely done, Cheryl. Nicely done, Barbara. I have I'm going to do a hypothetical here because I think because you guys are close to being on the same page, but also there's a little different. So here's my question. All right, and I think it'll resonate with many of our participants and viewers or attendees. Is it, imagine that you have an organization that has huge technical debt, by which I mean they are behind, all right? They have not kept up, similar to what the situation Barbara found herself at Toyota. So you've got a situation where they are not digitally ready. They are digitally behind. I mean, they're not ahead of the curve. They're not behind. They're not even aware there is a curve, right? So you've got so there's that fundamental issue, and then link that with the fact that the business executives are vision challenged. They're just doing their job. So like, how do we move them forward? How do we, organizations, what do you do in a situation like that?
Cheryl?
And Natalie, you can jump in too, even though the Norwegians are way ahead of the curve on just about every dimension. I mean, but
IT organizations that haven't kept up. I showed the two slides. I showed the early, now mature digital technologies from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and the emerging technologies. IT organizations today, it doesn't take a whole lot of time and effort anymore because we've been through all the learning curve to take those technologies. I have them listed there. There's 24 of them. They apply to almost every organization around. Take those technologies and make sure that you build the infrastructure. This is table stakes. This is what you need to help your organization even begin to think about digitalization. And I know some people say, well, let's just outsource. Let's just outsource to public cloud. We have, during our research, we found that large, small, and mid-sized companies are bringing public cloud back in. It's the same technology that you use for private cloud, and then you have the skills to actually know and understand how to do what you need to do for delivery. So my first step would be to take those early technologies. I would ensure that the ones that made a difference in the organization were implemented quickly. And as you do that, then you begin to help the business understand that they are responsible for taking the organization to the next level. We can help them, we can explain it to them, but if they have absolutely no interest, if like Polaroid, they decided in 1975, a Polaroid engineer invented a digital camera. And Polaroid said, no, that's never going to take off. And besides, that'll ruin our business. Okay, so, I mean, not Polaroid, Kodak.
Kodak, right.
So, look where Kodak is today. Every company has choices like that. They can make decisions like that. But there is a process for helping people along if they want to be helped. And if they don't, then I seriously doubt if they'll make it through the next decade.
And so if they don't, you should interview. Talk to a headhunter, right? Well, no, because it's a unique challenge that Barbara had at Toyota, because Toyota was a massively successful organization. They didn't realize that they didn't realize that there was another that there were opportunities that they were missing. So how did you?
Kodak was a massively successful organization. They were the top in the world until all of a sudden digital cameras destroyed their business. Lego actually a number of years ago came to they brought a really challenging question to their executives. They said, what if the Western world bans all plastic in the next 5 years? What would we do? And the management had to come around with a plan of what would happen, because at the time Lego was all plastic, what they were going to do. And they began to diversify. They began to take their blocks and customize them. They began to make they began to make movies from them. They created parks, themes parks. Right now, Legos is one of the largest toy companies in the world because somebody challenged their management and said, well, what happens if? So maybe that's all you have to do. Maybe you just have to go to the manager and to the leadership team and say, what happens if? And give them a realistic scenario that forces them to think outside of where they are, who they are, and what they're doing. Having somebody come in from the outside and just attempt to make all these changes or assigning it to one person or one group just doesn't work. It takes a team. As you said, it takes everybody.
Gotcha. Barbara, I'm coming back to this idea of when I first met you, basically when I was at UCLA. I mean, you were really into developing your people. I mean, in a big way, and so I like that piggybacks with Cheryl, because Cheryl, you sort of sat there. You actually had a career plan. You sort of said, I want to be a CIO. Ergo, if I'm going to be a good CIO, I need to have these 4 dimensions that you specified, and then I'm going to fill those. So, Barbara, how did you? Because I'm not certain that's how people were thinking back then in Toyota. How did you help people build their career ladder?
Well, I think it was, again, and you and I always related on this theme, which was always having kind of an ability to lean to the future, or sort of to think about where things were headed and build to that, as opposed to trying to kind of just get better in the moment. And I think I spent a lot of time really trying to understand what were the skills and how were they going to evolve based on how the technology churn was happening and what was needed to do that, and how long would it take to develop someone. And back in my day, I took or tried to take COBOL programmers into the next generation of object-oriented programming, and it was like, really? I learned a lot from trying to do that, but it taught me about how you pay attention to that, but you can't unless you really are leaning into what and where the trends are going and how to do that. And teaching my team members along the way so they take more ownership instead of waiting for the business to hand them, their promotion or hand them their training or whatever. I wanted to have a very integrated way of thinking about a career. And I think and if you caught it in my talk, I was as intentional on the business side as I was on the tech IT side. I wanted to disrupt that line and blur that line between the functional silos of IT and where the business stopped and started and where IT stopped and started. And I think that was and still is to my my orientation a way of defining it as long as you put IT in that container. I mean, yes, there still has to be someone operating the systems and ensuring the services are safe and delivered appropriately. But I think it really, in my view, it really comes down to individual leadership. And I think the tendency still is, and Cheryl's right to that extent, that that classic traditional IT leadership is more and better oriented around the more traditional services. However, I think, at least I would like to think, that there are opportunities based on an individual's leadership chops to move beyond that and to become the leader, to become whether you call it business or I don't care what you call it, but it's really someone who can influence and take that business to the next level. I don't care what label you put on them. But if you can't come out of the business backyard and not have any real understanding of how technology works and the complexities of it. So you have to have a little bit of both if you're going to aggressively move into a very transformational leadership role in a big company. So that's,
what I've been telling technology people is this is a great opportunity for you. If you have a tendency in technology, and if it's something that you are passionate about and really good at, you just don't have to work in IT any longer. You can work directly in the business. You should be taking your skills directly into the business. And people that I'm teaching, like at George Mason, in their grad school classes, love that idea. Now that we're techies, they don't like the word techies, they like technologists. Technologists with really great skills should be able to say, oh, I would like to work on infrastructure. I would like to work on internal ERP systems, or I would like to work on developing a new diaper that has sensors in it, or a battery that has Bluetooth in it, or, I want to take my skills and I want to bring those skills directly into the business and help the business learn about my technologies, which is what I'm bringing to the table, but also help me learn more about how they do their job too.
So one of the jobs that is essential to moving forward, all right, is basically this idea of is you've got to manage the data, right? It's got to be secure. It's got to be appropriate privacy, if you will, and how do you do that into that? Because as Cheryl, you said, is like data has traditionally not been something that IT was strong at. And Barbara, you were prescient when you basically said, Zach, whatever you do, don't give away our data, right? But how do you build that muscle in an organization?
Well, I will admit that I was one of the CIOs that did not pay enough time and attention to data. But today, you can't do that. Amazon knows what you're going to buy before you buy it. That all has to do with understanding data analytics, machine learning, AI. That's the way companies operate today. Data is the most critical resource a company has, can get, develops, creates, and uses. And that's why the chief data officer was not on the list of sexy titles. It's a real honest to goodness title that you really need to understand data across the entire organization, not only inside the organization, but outside the organization. And we talk a lot about thick data and mass data and all sorts of kinds of data and all sorts of ways to get data today. It's a whole new world out there, and it's critical.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can jump in with a question, because of some of the questions coming in there, and building upon one of them. If your job is today as CIO or an IT manager executive in a company, you're faced with not that much IT resources, financial resources. You might be reporting up to the CFO, and you have the business yelling for change. We want improvement faster, smarter, and you're stuck with legacy systems. And because Cheryl, you talked about this digital ready infrastructure and getting that ready for innovation. And Barbara, you talked about client server and bypassing some technology to leapfrog into the future. But what's your advice to that CIO stuck in that scenario?
I mean, from my perspective, legacy systems typically cost more than the new technologies do. You can probably do a pretty quick and easy business case to say, if I bring in an ERP, these are the savings I have. If I bring in, if you take a look at the early technologies, almost anything on that list is a server farm compared to however you're operating your infrastructure today. You're going to find that it is so much more cost effective to begin to migrate to these technologies than it is to maintain the legacy systems. And there's an 80-20 rule. This is what I found in every major organization I've been in. 20% of your systems support 80% of your operations. So what in the world are you doing with the other 80% of those systems? Ralph Segunda, when he went to General Motors, one of his big activities was to cut out everything that Perot Systems was doing to support all these systems, these thousands and thousands of applications that they have that they never used. He created millions of dollars of savings almost in the first week he was there, just by simply saying, let's apply the 80-20 rule here. And that is a really important rule to learn as a CIO because it works beautifully almost every time.
So it goes back to Barbara's point, perhaps then follow the money, but it's here, not and utilization and focus here.
Well, you've got new technologies and you've got eliminating legacy stuff that literally you don't need anymore. It's just habit. It doesn't actually provide the value anymore. And I am a firm believer in training new people. If you're a good technologist, I can easily move you from COBOL to object-oriented stuff. It is not that difficult to train technologists in new technologies. So I always have attempted to use my own internal staff as we made these leaps into the emerging, initially the early technologies and now into the emerging technologies.
So Thornton, we're almost at top of the hour. You want to see closing remarks, or perhaps also ask Cheryl and Barbara if they want to give some recommendations?
Our experts, and so do you have any closing thoughts for those the people who are out there in the world trying to transform, trying to move forward, trying to manage career ladders? Any suggestions for those who are trying to transform or are on a transformation journey?
I was sitting in a meeting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was sitting in a meeting once with John Chambers from Cisco, and he was asking my CEO and I, John Hammergren at McKesson, what are our 3 critical success factors? What is IT's critical success factors to the business? And John looked at me and said, why don't you answer? And I said, availability, availability, availability. If our systems are not up and running, if they are not delivering value to the customer, if our platforms aren't there, we're nothing. We don't have products and services that we're actually offering to customers. So I said, I believe my job has always been to make sure that the systems are there and operating as they need to be when they need to be.
Barbara?
I would say just don't give up and work very hard at becoming, very, very good at communicating and navigating the politics of the business. And because, yeah, you can have a lot of ideas about technology improvements that can save money, but at the end of the day, it's really about building that line of trust and having someone seeing you other than just a tech head and that's going to be servicing, and someone who's actually going to be leading and partnering, helping you get to the future. And I think that would be my advice. Just
if I could close with that, is that I love the don't give up basically idea, and the other thing is don't despair because you are not alone. As we've demonstrated here at our event, at our virtual event today, is there are people out there who can help. I mean, I know that both Barbara and Cheryl are very active in mentoring and assisting, and that's the whole reason the Digital Value Institute exists, is to make your path, which there's a reason they call it work. It's hard. And so it's to make it a little easier. So please do submit questions, because this was sort of a teaser, just to sort of get the ball rolling, get the minds firing, so that so because we really do our best work when you say like, well, that was interesting, but my real question is X, and we would be delighted to answer what that is, because you're not alone. There are people here to help you out, and they'd be delighted to do that. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Atlee, to say goodbye and be the adult in the room.
So No, I would say what makes this so great is, and perhaps building upon what was said there, is the opportunity to learn from others' experience. And therefore, again, thank you to Barbara, Cheryl, and Thornton for sharing your expertise, your recommendations here, because that helps us others a lot in this process. And that's why these opportunities are so welcome, to be able to learn from others that have been successful here in journeys. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to the attendees. The recording will be available over the weekend on the website. So if you want to see it, share it, feel free to do so. And thank you again all for joining.
Thanks for having us, Axel.
Thank you.